continuing our reading from The Breathless, Dark Ripples, Part 1. Chapter 13, Keep Close. He's never failed Sherlock, and he never will, so long as he has breath to give. The afternoon wears on. Back inside the house of the disemboweled accountant, Greg makes a phone call and learns what Sherlock had been hinting at. Apparently, the victim had occasional custody of a teenage daughter from a previous marriage. There aren't many clear signs that the girl had been in the house recently, though, let alone on the night of her father's murder. It takes Greg until sundown to figure it out for sure, with enough corroborating evidence that Donovan doesn't think he's just pulled the knowledge from midair. He knows it would have been faster with Sherlock around. Well, all right, he doesn't know that. He hasn't really allowed himself the chance to see the kid in action, but every tip he's been given so far has been accurate, and Greg can't seem to help his automatic trust in Sherlock's abilities. Now, Greg's back outside in the thankfully fresh air, on his way to the car, intent on getting back to the yard. He needs to work on tracing the victim's recent phone calls and to try again to contact the girl's mother. He's sure by this point that the daughter is involved, though there's still the not inconsequential question of whether she's truly been taken against her will. But again, Sherlock had insisted it was a kidnapping. Still don't know what he saw outside here to be able to say that, he thinks, slowing his steps as he looks over the features of doorstep and garden that would be visible from the road at the front. I should have asked him before blowing my top and sending him off. His thoughts are interrupted by a startling decrease in the available oxygen around him, almost as if his preoccupation with Sherlock has triggered his being thrown into a ripple. The plunge into the vision's dark, glassy water is abrupt and takes him off guard. It sends him falling sideways to brace a shoulder against the high wall of the victim's side garden, mostly hidden in shadow. He sees a house, long abandoned by the looks of it, its shadowy interior painted orange by street lamps that filter through the bare and broken windows. Remnants of furniture are scattered here and there. In the room where Sherlock stands, there is a heavy old desk and nothing else. Sherlock is holding what appears to be a wad of cash, offering it to a tall, greasy-haired man who's dangling a small baggie enticingly from thick fingers. Now I have to watch you buy your poison too, thinks Greg, outraged. But then he hears the dealer speak. So you want to pay off what Bess owes, eh? Think that'll clear your roomy slate? Fine, your loss. Another 20 quid and you can have your fix tonight too. Sherlock shakes his head, determined. I don't need it. I'm done with that. Oh, are you now? The dealer's laugh is an unpleasant rasp. Nah, you and I both know better, don't we? You were gone for 2 months, sure, but not 12 hours ago you were back in here, paying your dues like a good boy. You're not going nowhere, sweetheart. I am. I'm done. I'm not like the others. And what have you got to look forward to? You're cruising a one-way ticket, love, just like your Bess and Paulie. Sooner you know that, sooner you can accept it. You know you want this, you sweet thing. A shudder of pure revulsion runs through Greg's incorporeal presence. Take it and let me go, Sherlock hisses, stepping forward to press his money at the man. Oh, I'll take something, all right. There's a lunge in the half-dark, a gasp and a grunt, and Greg's in motion. He doesn't really expect it to work. He'd tried repeatedly with the lead bully back at the boarding school years ago, and had eventually decided that his consistent failure must have had something to do with the target's violent intent. Still, it's the nearest option, and it's worth a shot, so Greg tries to push into the dealer's head. It feels awful, like being tugged into a river of black rapids, immovable from their raging course. Sickened, Greg immediately frees himself and swirls outward in a panic, searching for an assist. If he has to, he'll look outside the house, but he doesn't know how much time he has. There's got to be someone, he tells himself, swooping through dark, dirty hallways as fast as he can, away from where Sherlock is. He can't hear what's going on, just the distant reverberations of an exclamation and a growl through the old house that only spur him to search faster, and thankfully he finds a junkie slumped in a corner 4 rooms away. Fucking hell, it's a hard push at first. The inebriated ones always are. And when Greg's got his eyes, he's disoriented, staggering. It's hard to move him properly. The translated sensation from the drugged young man's limbs is fuzzy and thick, like wading through a pool of treacle. It feels like ages, but Greg makes him stumble into the room at last, only to see... Oh God! The dealer has forced Sherlock up against the desk, bent over forward, hand tight at his throat, and it would be bad enough that he's trying to choke him, but he's ripping at Sherlock's jeans and fumbling with obvious intent, rough and clearly not consensual. Greg tastes an echo of copper as he throws the junkie forward at the man. Stop! 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 And then the push is done. In the last wavering second before his view fades, he sees Sherlock running from the room, escaping, one hand hitching up his jeans and the other at his neck, eyes wide and panting, but safe. With a harsh gasp, Greg comes back to himself. He's shaking all over, and he's bitten his tongue. The flavor of blood is sharp and bitter. He makes it less than 3 steps farther along the garden wall before he vomits. Sergeant Berkeley comes upon him in the aftermath. He's still hunched over, knuckling moisture from the corners of his eyes, trying to catch his breath. The back of his neck is clammy. Finally got to you too, huh? Ollie asks from a respectful distance. Not surprised. I've just barely stuffed myself chucking up a few times today. Wish we could open the windows in there at least. Is all Greg manages in answer, straightening with some effort. He's lucky the scene is gory. He can just play along instead of trying to think up some stomach bug excuse for his distress. I think Donovan has a bottle of water with us, sir. Do you want me to get it for you? He spits one last time into the shrubbery and turns around, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. No, thanks, Ollie. I'm on my way to the office. I'll be fine. Casework runs long into the night. Greg stays on for hours after he's already sent the others away, tracing and retracing each of his meager leads step by step until there's nothing for it but to shamble home and sleep a little of his precious time away. When he wakes next morning, the bright wings at his temples have extended back over both of his ears, 2 long and unmistakable streaks of silver. Greg grimaces at his reflection. Then he opens up the toilet tank and calmly pulls out his emergency supplies, careful of any noise that might wake his wife. Using the little brush meant for mustache coloring, he applies a little dye over the new areas, just enough to make the difference less obvious. As the dark color washes away over the next few weeks, it should look like a gradual change. It's fine, he tells himself, trying to forestall his vain impulse to be disappointed. It looks fine. Probably nobody would have noticed but Nadia anyway. And hey, I did good last night, didn't I? He hasn't been able to put the incident fully from his mind, although he's kept most of his focus on his work through habitual discipline. All that morning until the moment he walks into his office to pick up the thread of the investigation, he's still turning Sherlock's words over in his thoughts. I don't need it. I'm done. Could it even be possible that one harsh rebuke from D.I. Lestrade might be enough to set him straight, where repeated stints in rehab hadn't quite managed it? Perhaps it hasn't been such a good thing, after all, that Greg's kept himself so rigidly from involvement, at least not on Sherlock's end of things. Greg hadn't contacted Mycroft's office the previous afternoon. He'd fully intended to do so, of course, but it had seemed prudent to wait until he'd calmed himself. He'd feared that the elder Holmes might be perceptive enough to divine the seemingly illogical depths of his emotion from the wording of an impulsively written text message. So he'd gone inside and set his mind onto the case instead, with the thought that he would report Sherlock's apparent relapse later in the evening. And then, with what had happened, well, the right time for an unemotional account had clearly passed. I don't need it. I'm done with that. I don't need it. In the end, it takes 3 days' hard work to locate the girl, and another 2 to finally capture both the murderous kidnapper and his accomplice. Greg never sends the text. 4 quiet weeks later, Greg sits down at his desk with a fresh coffee and a mid-morning snack. After 10 full minutes pass with no interruptions, he judges himself safe enough to type Sherlock's name into the box on his computer screen. He figures he's owed the indulgence of another search entry, surveillance or not, for the assistance he's provided Mycroft Holmes. When the results come up, he immediately sees the single difference he'd hoped for, a clearly listed current address. He jots it down and stuffs the scrap of paper into his trouser pocket, flicking his eyes somewhat nervously to the unchanging display of his desk phone as he does. The first hints of sunset are beginning to become apparent as Greg finally leaves the yard. He makes his way to Marleybone and locates the address he'd noted. The building's facade is bland and featureless, a block of flat, beige brick with equally uninteresting buildings abutting it on either side. Even the dental association nearby seems to have more panache. It's nothing like what Greg thinks of as Sherlock's style. The building's entrance hall is narrow and stolidly conservative, and the wooden staircase appears to have been recently retreaded. Greg glances all around as he opens the door to step inside. If this is, in fact, the location of the flat that Mycroft had procured for his brother, the subject of their argument on the night Sherlock left rehab 3 months ago, there's surely a camera trained on Greg right now, likely more than one. He's not really expecting that Sherlock will be at home, but he's come this far, so he mounts the stairs without hesitation and climbs to the 3rd floor. Before he reaches the door of Unit 302, though, he stops in his tracks. There's music filtering into the hall through the thin walls. It's a violin, and the melody being drawn from its strings is strange and intricate, hauntingly beautiful. Greg's wanted to hear him play for over 14 years. The music now hits him like a hard blow to the solar plexus. Waves of memory roar up from the depths, scenes from the youth of a boy whose life he saved countless times. I'm almost 42 now, and you're 28. I've cared about you since before I knew your name, since before I even knew you were real. I've thought of you almost every day of your entire life, and for over 2/3 of mine. He shifts his balance, unconsciously swaying with the pull of the melody, and there's a tiny creak in the worn floorboards beneath his feet. The abrupt silence that falls is shocking. Greg's eyes pop open. He hadn't realized he'd closed them, as the door before him is flung wide. Sherlock is barefoot, dressed in only a thin Henley shirt and dark flannel pajama bottoms, holding his violin and bow together in one hand. Lestrade? He sounds surprised, as if he'd expected someone else. Someone unwanted, Greg thinks, though he certainly isn't sure that he fits into the category of wanted visitors. Hello, Greg says, suddenly at a loss. He digs his hands around at the bottoms of his pockets and rolls his shoulders a bit as the pause stretches long. Finally, Sherlock seems to come to some sort of realization about generally accepted behavior when receiving company. Come in, I suppose, he mumbles, stepping aside to allow it. Yeah, all right. Inside, with the door closed behind them, Sherlock is a silent whirlwind of motion for approximately 7 seconds. He shoves a pile of printed materials from a low upholstered chair, rights the tipped shade of a floor lamp, kicks something oblong and heavy-sounding to roll underneath the sofa, and cranes his neck to peer from the narrow window before snapping its curtains shut. Then he steps over to his side table, really an upturned packing crate, and bends to place his instrument gently into its case. Greg watches all this from the small patch of clear floor before the door, and tries again to speak like an intelligent adult. I didn't mean to bother you. No bother, it's fine, replies Sherlock, turning to face him and tilting his head with a pointed flick of his eyes to the cleared seat. Okay, good. He sits, for lack of anything else to do with himself. His eye catches on the dislodged papers near his foot, where the words forensic technique peek out among the mess. You needn't try to keep it secret, you know, Sherlock says next. Greg's eyes widen and shoot up at once. Sherlock is leaning against the side of his raggedy sofa, crossing his arms and ankles in a casually knowing pose. What? Asks Greg, hating himself for the tremor of fear in his voice he's unable to cover completely. I already know you've met my brother. It's entirely obvious that it was you who colluded with him to have me removed from the scene of that triple hanging." "Oh, thank God." After a deep breath, he responds, "Well, yeah, I have to say, I'm surprised you came back around after all that. You could have found another DI to follow after." Sherlock scoffs and slides down into the sofa's seat with a thump, running a hand through his tousled mess of dark hair. "Hardly. I've seen them at work. They're not worth my time." "Yeah, but I ran you off and colluded and all." Greg knows he sounds moronic. He's just too thrown by the whole situation to organize his thoughts beyond not blurting out anything he needs to keep hidden. As it is, he finds himself voicing the very next non-secret thought that occurs to him. "I'm worth your time? Don't be so tiresome, Lestrade. We've already been over this." Greg moistens his lips, remembering the strange dance of their previous conversations. "Right, well, I can't just take you up on an offer like that, you know? Not without—" Sherlock interrupts him with a sudden lunge forward from the sofa, landing on his knees. In 2 quick motions, he shoved his long sleeves upward and thrust his arms into Greg's personal space. "Look, you thought I'd started again, but I hadn't. Not really. Not like that. It was just I went to speak with someone, and she wouldn't tell me what I needed to know unless I went with her. And I decided to be okay because it makes me think faster, see more. It makes everything not dull. And then after that, I figured out what case you pulled. I thought I could—" "You thought you could help me. Because when you're using, you can understand everything." He frowns down at the faded marks, evidence of what he knows must be years of use. Just one tiny pinpoint stands out darker than the others, and it's clearly not fresh. It's been only 5 weeks. Can he really trust Sherlock so soon? "Faster, yes, but not only when I'm using, Lestrade." Sherlock pulls his arms away and retreats to his seat once more, eyeing Greg with trepidation. Greg stares back at him, trying to reconcile what he's being told and what he can't admit he knows already with the face before him. It's haughty and confident, and at the same time it's almost desperate, like an echo of the little boy he'd been. "I can't stay away. I mustn't," he realizes. It's like a gong has been struck somewhere inside, and he can feel the ringing of it all the way to his toes. He wants to help me solve crimes. He's asking me to give him a reason to stay clean. Fuck, it's dangerous. But if he needs me... "I'll find a way," he decides, standing up to leave. "Don't use anything else, and don't come creeping round any scenes, yeah? When I need you, I'll call. And I'll need to see what you can do first. Next week I'll bring something by for you to look at. See what you make of it, all right? A cold case? Murder?" Greg nods, watching an anticipatory smile spread over the young man's face. Already he's wondering how quickly he'll come to regret this. No matter the risk, Greg knows he can't back out, not now that he's needed. He's never failed Sherlock, and he never will, so long as he has breath to give.